Well, despite the Shabbat candles, I have had the best week. And because it came on the heels of our recent Holy Spark Shabbat, where we celebrated 50 years of women in the Rabbinic, it was even better. Rabbi Jen Lader and I attended the Women's Rabbinic Network Conference this past week in Beverly, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. We were over 100 women rabbis from all around the country, Israel, Canada, and the UK, convening for the theme of sacred empowerment. I look forward to this conference that we hold every 2 years for the friendship, the learning, the inspiration, and the rejuvenation. Though exhausted from the programming, but probably more likely from staying up half the night with old friends, I feel absolutely invigorated from the week. It gave me new perspective and insight, as if I had put on a pair of Holy Sparks glasses with which to see the world. I wear contact lenses in order to see the day-to-day, but I see the world through specialty glasses, Jewish glasses, Rabbinic glasses, feminist glasses. And this week, the WRN gave me a new prescription, trifocals, all three together in one pair. With these glasses, the ordinary becomes sacred. One might even say the sacred empowered, as per the theme of the convention. Take photography, for instance. A few years ago, the WRN hired a photographer to document our event and to take portraits of women rabbis illustrating the hashtag, this is what a rabbi looks like. It was created by one of our own WRN rabbis, Rabbi Leah Berkowitz, as a response to the oft-repeated phrase, "You don't look like a rabbi." This picture from the 2017 convention might look familiar. This year, our photographer in residence was Joan Roth. Truth be told, I didn't know who she was, except that she was a spry older woman, ever present and constantly switching between her fancy camera and her iPhone. Now, who is Joan Roth? A native Detroiter, it turns out, a Jewish, feminist, justice-making, world-changing photographer, photojournalist, ethnographer, and portraitist, who just celebrated her 80th birthday. On the last night, we watched a documentary about her life and work made in honor of the occasion. I learned how Joan took photography to the next level, documenting women's homelessness in Central Park and personally helping and advocating for these women, which ultimately led to the creation of the first women's shelters in New York City. Photographing Jewish women all around the world, from Ethiopia to Yemen, from India to Morocco and beyond. Documenting the immigration of indigenous cultures to Israel, working with Israeli women's efforts for equality and peace between Jewish and Arab Israelis and Palestinians. Capturing images of Gloria Steinem and the leaders of the feminist movement. And recently, taking pictures of Rabbi Sally Prizan, a photo for the Holy Sparks exhibit, and her portrait, soon to be unveiled in the National Portrait Gallery. And imagine, here she was, taking pictures of us. When I first met Joan, I hadn't yet put on my glasses. Oh, but once I did, I saw how she magically imbues her work with holiness. She is the epitome of sacred empowerment. The same sort of thing happened in a hug, a breakout session called Jews and Slow Fashion, led by Rabbi Carol Balin, who was one of my teachers back in rabbinic school and now a dear and precious friend. Her session was for anyone who loved yarn. Still, I wondered, what is slow fashion and how is this Jewish? Well, for those who don't know, it's a purpose-driven movement to create sustainable clothing with fair labor practices to reduce the exploitation of resources. I just thought it was because it takes a long time to knit a garment. We knitters sat around the table working on our individual projects while sharing texts and stories about textiles and needlework, taking the craft that many of us learned from our grandmothers to the level of protest, social change, even survival. We learned how women have been using craft to subvert social mores for decades. Before the Revolutionary War, women organized knitting circles as a means of protest against the Stamp Act. They used knitting circles to cover rebellious deeds like Old Mom Rinker, who would transport enemy information overheard in her family's tavern to General George Washington inside her knitting balls of yarn. I think I would have liked her. We heard stories of a Holocaust survivor, Rose Jerome, whose aunt taught her to knit, a skill that sustained her and her family throughout the war after escaping Nazi Europe to Shanghai. With her knitting, she designed and created beautiful sweaters for the women of Shanghai. As conditions continued to worsen for Jews, Rose and her family were forced into a ghetto and to live in a tiny room under a staircase that was once a bathroom. Finally, in 1947, they were granted visas to the United States, but only allowed to take $10 with them. Rose, however, sewed money into the buttons on her hand-knit sweater, and she hid $80. In the United States, she eventually opened 2 knitting shops in New York City. We read an excerpt of an essay written by Peggy Ornstein in the New York Times called "The Revolutionary Power of a Skein of Yarn." Included in this piece is this quote: "Knitting is considered a craft, one which you begin by casting on, evoking spells and witchery, a kind of practical magic. What greater sorcery is there, really, than making something, turning raw fiber to thread?" As Rabbi Balin reminded us, we were in witch country, after all. Salem, Massachusetts was just a few miles away, and we delved into the history of the witch trials by putting them into the context of the historical time period leading up to that horrible summer of 1692, when 20 people, both men and women, were hanged as witches. Now, a witch in those days was different from what we perceive today, like the good witch Glinda or the wicked witch of the West. A witch was defined as someone who sold their soul to the devil in exchange for supernatural powers. People as young as 4 and as old as 80 were arrested on suspicion of being witches. Many died in jail. Others' lives were changed forever after. One woman we learned about went mad because of her experience, and I still can't get their stories out of my head. These were the marginalized, the poor, divorcees, those who were perhaps a little peculiar, women who fought with their husbands or neighbors, or voiced a different opinion from the norm. They became scapegoats for the troubles that plagued the community, including the fact that Salem had recently lost its charter from England, which threatened its very existence, while farmers were struggling through a mini ice age with bitter cold winters and hot, hot summers that damaged the crops, plus recent wars between indigenous peoples and colonists. Published manuals had been brought over from Europe on finding and trying women as witches, where hundreds of women were put to death on suspicion. It reminded me that this doesn't just happen because one magistrate determines it to be so, or one minister preaches about the devil, but it takes the entire village to be complicit. We visited the Salem Witch Trial Memorial. Quotes from the trials are engraved on the stone in front of it. The one I remember says, "God knows I'm innocent." We sang songs, read poetry, and left our stones on their memorial as a sign that we were there and that we remember. I put my stone on the bench memorializing Rebecca Nurse, a member of the church, a mother of 9, who had a fight with her neighbor about a pig who trampled her yard. I said her name out loud and will raise her voice and tell her story so she can be heard, because she certainly wasn't in her day. I believe that this too is sacred empowerment, both for her and for us, because it means raising others up, like at the memorial. It means taking the tools that we have at our disposal and using them for good, as did the women in the knitting circles. And it means making a difference in the world based in ethics and values, as did our photographer, Joan Roth. It means all this and more. It means choosing which glasses you want to wear. It means prioritizing your values within our tradition. And it means making the ordinary sacred. In Jewish tradition, there's a ritual of reciting Eishet Chayil, or a woman of valor, to the woman of the house on Shabbat Eve, to honor her, to share appreciation and recognize her skills and value. Instead of the original version from the book of Proverbs, I suggest this modern version from Sidur Sha'ar Zahav, which raises up Eishet Chayil as a form of sacred empowerment at its best. Eishet Chayil mi yimsa, a woman of valor, is one of us. A woman of valor is good to behold, is worth more than rubies, more than precious gold. She is strong, she is brave in the world of today, and so we sing Eishet Chayil. The core of the earth may be found in her soul. Her face shows her vision, her deeds show her goals. Her fingers mold softly the world of her dreams, and so we reach high, Eishet Chayil. She studies the Torah with wit, flair, and fire. She's an angel in hiding, an heir to desire. She's a prophet, a sage, a leader, our kin. And so we inspire Eishet Chayil. She is one of us, all of us, what we can be, the gift of our lives and the will to be free. It's all about choices and integrity. And so we live Eishet Chayil. Let us all sing, reach high, inspire, and live. As together we say, Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. Amen, and Shabbat Shalom.